Welcome to the Safety Culture webinar series. My name is Jenny Hunter and I will be your host for this webinar. There is a growing recognition of the powerful influence of culture on safety performance. We know that across industry, businesses are all at different stages of their safety journey. We also know that there is still a lot of confusion and uncertainty about safety climate and culture concepts and exactly how to go about improving them. This webinar is the first in a series of 5, specifically designed to increase your knowledge and awareness about safety culture and climate concepts and provide critical insights to Australian workplace safety culture across different industry sectors. The 3 industry sectors we're going to focus on through this series include health and community services, transport and construction. We're also very excited to introduce to you a range of leading researchers and industry operators throughout the series and give you access to evidence-based information products and resources to guide your safety efforts to promote a safety culture in your own organisation. This webinar series has been brought to you by the Safety Leadership at Work program, an initiative of the Workplace Health and Safety Queensland Board. We expect this session to take just under 1 hour and the recording will be posted to the Safety Leadership at Work webpage within 2 weeks from today. Before we get much further into it, I'd like to take some time to tell you a little bit more about myself and our guest speaker today, Miss De Cieri. Helen is a professor at the Monash Business School at Monash University. Helen has over 30 years experience in health, safety and management research. Thank you, Helen, for being with us today. Now, for a little bit more about my background. For some time now, but probably not quite as long as Helen, I've been working across a range of safety, human resource and psychosocial safety roles. I'm fortunate that my current role allows me to bring all these experiences together to lead an exciting program of work to increase the capacity of Queensland businesses to lead safety and improve workplace mental health. Now, let's get started. There are so many well-known examples of the outcomes of poor safety culture. Think Deepwater Horizon and Pike River. This photo shows the moment that the Challenger space shuttle exploded. Even NASA, traditionally thought of as a technically brilliant organisation, had failed. The Challenger was one of NASA's greatest triumphs. It was the second shuttle to reach space in 1983. It successfully completed 9 milestone missions, but on its 10th launch on January 28, 1986, the shuttle exploded 73 seconds after liftoff, killing the 7 crew members. A presidential commission revealed the technical causes of the accident, which was traced to cold weather degrading the seal on the boosters. Additionally, it brought to light cultural problems at NASA that led to a failing to voice all technical problems to the launch decision team. In an example closer to home, a worker was killed at a Blackwater mine in a vehicle rollover early last year. I had the opportunity to hear directly from a mining executive of his anguish over learning that workers travelling in the vehicle were not wearing their seatbelt at the time of the vehicle accident. He stated that the fatality came as a surprise to him as the company was tracking well on a range of OHS measures, including lost time injury frequency rate. We've shared these 2 examples to bring to your attention why safety culture matters so much. While it is true that we've come a long way towards improving safety through the implementation of safety management systems, still more needs to be done. It's important that we acknowledge that safety systems are implemented by people. So if those people do not consider safety to be an important work goal or that the safety procedures make the job harder, they may not be used as intended. We also know that even safety leadership at the top is not enough. Safety leadership must be visible at all levels of an organisation, and this is one of the hallmarks of a positive safety culture. In today's session, we will introduce the latest research understanding about the nature of safety, climate and culture concepts. We'll explain why they are important influences of your organisation's safety performance and provide some practical guidance to help you initiate safety culture change in your workplace. A clear message from today is that we don't want you to add another procedure to your safety management system. We do want to help you build your knowledge of safety, climate and culture, and we want to help you feel more confident to go about improving your organisation's safety performance through safety, climate and culture initiatives. This webinar has been designed to help us achieve all of these objectives, and I'll share more details on the information, products and resources with you towards the end of the session. Safety, climate and culture have existed as concepts since the 1970s and rose to prominence in the 1980s due to several high-profile industrial accidents. Since then, hundreds of research studies have been done and articles published. Safety culture in particular is now widely accepted by industry. However, sometimes it seems like the closer we get to defining and understanding safety, climate and culture, the further away we actually are. And this can be confusing and become a barrier to progressing our safety journey. Fortunately, some consistencies have emerged to help us find our way. And what we do know with confidence and drawing on all that research is that safety culture does deliver improved safety performance. There are many research studies which confirm that organisations with positive safety cultures have improved safety performance outcomes. Secondly, scholars and industry professionals all agree that safety culture is hard to measure and that it stays pretty steady over time. The good news is that safety climate is easier to measure and changes more readily. This means we can impact safety climate by how well we manage safety each day. Safety climate is an important measure as part of an overall strategy to improve safety culture maturity. On the screen now we have an iceberg. And I have to apologise, this is a safety webinar, so we couldn't get away with at least one slide with an iceberg on it. But it really does help to explain these concepts, so please stay with me. To use the iceberg analogy, climate is based primarily on tangibles such as systems, practices, behaviour and the perceptions of these, whereas culture is inferred, and it's about attitudes, beliefs and norms that form as a result of how the organisation does business and the things that the organisation does to survive and adapt. Climate has been described as a surface level snapshot of the underlying culture, and so it's a partial indicator of the company's cultural health. The way we can change the culture is via the climate. If we change formal parts of the company, such as the systems and procedures, this is likely to lead to changed behaviours, and if implemented well, over time this will start to challenge pre-existing cultural beliefs and assumptions. Part of making sense of safety, climate and culture is to think about how these pieces fit together. It is generally agreed that safety culture has 4 levels or pieces. The first is the observable and tangible aspects, which is the behaviours, the symbols, the posters that you see in the workplace. But these can be misleading if they're the only source of information about safety culture. Systems are how safety is meant to be and how safety is put in place as a way of formalising the culture, setting expectations about how things should be done, and they're generally seen through standards, policies, rules and procedures. Perceptions refer to the experience of safety on a daily basis, particularly around the importance of safety relative to other demands such as production, and this perceptions is the safety climate. Values and beliefs are very deep assumptions about what the organisation cares about and why things are done in certain ways. And depending on how aligned individual employees are around these values and beliefs determines how strong and consistent the safety culture is. Together, all the aspects are considered to be part of how an organisation manages safety. Only by measuring all of these components together can an organisation get an accurate picture of how well it's currently doing in safety. You might be familiar with some of or all of these models that are up on the screen, DuPont and Hudson. Safety culture maturity models use terms such as pathological or emerging for poor performers, right through to generative or continually improving for best performers. Business managers seem to really like undertaking a safety culture maturity assessment, as it quickly helps senior leaders to understand the stage or level of maturity of their company's safety culture and performance. But what a safety culture maturity assessment is really about is providing a structured approach for organisations to understand how mature their safety systems are and to develop a plan to keep improving their safety efforts and continue their cultural journey. In summary, culture maturity models are a way of integrating all of the previous components of how safety is managed into one comprehensive framework. Even though culture maturity models may seem different on the surface, there are a lot of features that safety maturity models share. The Safety Leadership at Work team is working on a simple 3-step maturity model that combines all of these separate ways of thinking. And at this stage, we think about culture maturity in 3 stages, or at 3 levels. Stage 1 is the beginning stage, where safety is probably not a strong cultural value and driven mainly by some external need to do it, such as avoiding a fine or complying with a contractual obligation. Stage 2 is more effective for safety performance because it is now a priority. The focus at this stage is embedding a value for safety and formalising it through safety systems. Stage 3 is the most effective level of maturity for safety and means that safety and production are integrated. Safety simply becomes a natural way of doing business. A common mistake many businesses make is to miss the assessment of some elements of their safety culture. For example, they might be using a climate assessment that doesn't align with their cultural assessment or safety systems tool. This can sometimes lead to a mismatch between data collected and evidence required to properly assess or demonstrate cultural maturity. Making the connection between safety climate, safety management and safety leadership means we diagnose the safety culture more effectively and have more confidence in our overall safety maturity results. Now that we have the relationship between safety culture and safety climate more clear, let's take a closer look at safety climate surveys, an important part of the overall approach to your safety culture journey. In fact, the bulk of the research in safety culture to date has been explored through the lens of safety climate, which is a very solid evidence base. Here's what we know about safety climate. It has a consistent bunch of dimensions. For example, management safety commitment, perception of safety systems. It both predicts and is predicted by safety incidents like injuries, meaning that how we manage safety events can impact on safety climate in the future. It is dynamic, that is, it changes over time, and it can be different in terms of how management are perceived versus the supervisor, as well as being different from one team to another, and in essence, there can be subcultures. It's both influenced by and enabled by leadership behaviour, which means that leaders play a big role in establishing a safety climate and sustaining it. Through the resources that go along with this webinar series, we'll be helping you to move this theory into practice, and I will share more with you about these resources at the end of the webinar session. Now let's turn to our expert speaker, Professor De Cieri from Monash University. Helen, before we get started, I'm sure everyone would like to know a little bit more about you. And I've just sort of got a question here I hope you don't mind responding to. How did you find yourself actually working as a safety culture and climate researcher? And can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on at the moment?
Oh, hello Jenny, hello everyone. I started around 30 years ago as a psychologist, and it was the time when, as you mentioned, in the 80s, safety culture rose to prominence because there had been a number of very sad incidents related to safety. And I was particularly interested in job stress and how work affects our mental health, and over the years I've continued to research in a range of areas of health and safety across industries from mining to healthcare and everything in between, and in several countries other than Australia as well as here. And my main interest is in identifying the positive strategies and actions that can be put in place in a work site to prevent injuries and illnesses. And I see safety culture and safety climate as really central to this. So I'm happy to be here to discuss my research and what we've learnt about safety culture and safety climate. So we have learnt quite a lot, but somehow all these decades later we're still here talking about safety culture and safety climate.
Well, thanks, Helen. It's really interesting, and I know that Helen will be talking more in detail about her latest research, focusing in on health and community services later on in this series. But Helen, I believe that you've got some important insights from the work that you've been undertaking to share with us now. So I'll hand over and let you take us through that material.
Thanks, Jenny. My research investigates managers' and workers' perceptions and behaviours and attitudes related to issues such as their health and safety in the workplace. And if we can identify what people think about their health and safety, for example, whether they're willing to speak up about health and safety, or whether they feel committed, whether they see safety as a real priority at work, that knowledge can help us to identify practical ways to keep workers safe. If we know what people really value in their workplace, what really motivates them with regard to safety, then that can help to identify interventions to put in place, practical strategies, even small things that can make a big difference with regard to their health and safety. So I'm really fortunate to work with a group of terrific people at Monash University. We have a multidisciplinary team that investigates a range of issues related to safety culture and safety climate. And we know these two concepts are important because the research shows, as Jenny's already introduced, that a positive safety climate can lead to reduced health and safety incidents. So to put it in simple terms, safety culture and safety climate really help us to answer the question, what keeps you healthy and safe at work? So to think about the background as a starting point, we know that the problem is substantial. The cost of work-related injury and illness is substantial in Australia and in other countries around the world. Clearly there is a business case for attending to prevention of health and safety incidents. The costs in human terms, particularly the costs to workers, are much higher than even the costs to industry. And the costs are enduring over many years if you think about the impact that an injury can have on an individual worker, their co-workers, and their family and friends. Of course, the patterns of illness and injury will vary across industries, so we see differences between what types of things are major problems in healthcare compared with what we see in construction. But we do know that we need to consider a whole range of things. So it's not just physical safety, but also psychological safety and concerns around physiology or disease that needs attention. And the research shows overall that investing in safety climate and preventive and positive actions in the workplace are really good, sound investments and can lead to a range of positive outcomes with regard to reducing the costs of work-related injury and illness. So to understand how to prevent injuries and illness, we need to kind of go back to the future. We need to look at the underlying causes, which include issues related to safety culture and safety climate. So in many workplaces, I spend a lot of time going around talking to managers and talking to workers about their health and safety. And I particularly see managers, senior managers, board members, focusing on the outcomes of health and safety. So they'll be looking at counting lost time injuries or counting the cost of compensation claims. And those are, of course, important, but to manage those, we need to understand what's caused them in the first place. And Jenny mentioned disasters and, for example, the Blackwater mine fatality. where understanding the cultural antecedents of a problem can really help to identify ways to prevent future illnesses and injuries from happening. So let's talk about safety culture and safety climate. First of all, we need to know what they are. And Jenny's already introduced and really helped me out by introducing those ideas. But in a bit more detail, if you want to know everything you never wanted to know about safety culture and safety climate, there is a lot of research out there to explain these issues. In one project with Dr. Trang Vu, we did a systematic review finding every definition we could possibly find around the world about safety culture and safety climate and related constructs. And we found more than 100 different definitions being used by regulators, academics, consultants, employers around the world. There are a lot of similarities between them, but even with research going back over 30 years, there's still no unanimous agreement and no unanimous preferred measurement approach for these either. Our reports, by the way, will be available. There'll be more information about those at the end. Now, we do know, though, that there's general agreement about what is safety culture and safety climate in terms of their core elements. So I'll talk a bit about those. Now, as Jenny has indicated, we do have these two terms. Safety culture usually refers to the enduring and stable values that people have. And that's often really hard to measure. Even though we might use the term safety culture, we're talking about the underlying values people have, and to try to think about how to influence that is quite hard. The way into that is to look at safety climate. Safety climate, if you want to think about the tip of the iceberg, is more often used to describe the more evident or tangible, measurable outputs or aspects of the safety culture. So safety climate is about the evidence of management's commitment to safety, or the elements that can be measured in a workplace. And it's usually referred to as the employee's perceptions of safety, and it can change over time. So for example, with a change of CEO or a change of policy, we can see changes in the safety climate in the workplace. Now, when we think about those core elements, as I mentioned earlier, that are generally agreed on as being involved in safety culture and therefore safety climate, we can see that there's been more than 50 different variables or themes that have been included in the way people have approached safety culture. Despite that variation, there are some agreed elements that in a positive safety culture, you have management behaviour and actions that demonstrate a real commitment to health and safety. So you see managers who don't just talk about health and safety, but they really put it in place, and their own behaviours are role modelling what they expect employees to be doing. And we want to see that not only with the senior managers, but with supervisors, middle-level managers, everyone throughout the organisation. Another important dimension of safety culture is that people believe they have a right to work in a healthy and safe environment. So there are safety systems and procedures in place, and they're followed. They're not just a piece of paper that people forget about, they're actually followed. Which means the third part is important, that people need accountability for their health and safety. So we need to have ways of ensuring they've got the equipment and the training and the skills that they need to really work safely in the workplace. Now, as Jenny mentioned, there are several different models of health and safety, and different models of safety culture. The safety leadership at work model is, I think, a really clever way of thinking about the different elements that are important in a safety culture. And this model is consistent with themes and conclusions of models that we see worldwide, that identifies there are several different elements. There's no one single thing that's going to make or break your safety culture. This might seem overwhelming, but there does need to be a combination or a bunch of elements that will ensure your safety culture is positive and successful. So we'll look at what those elements might be and how we'd measure them. How do you know how good your safety culture is in your organisation? Now, as an academic, others might disagree, but as an academic, my approach is usually to try and investigate and understand and measure the phenomena that we're interested in so that managers can make informed decisions about how to manage. To paraphrase Peter Drucker, the influential management educator and consultant who's become very well known through the 20th century, management is underpinned by measurement. And so our research really tries to build an evidence base to inform managers' decisions about which safety interventions would be worth investing in. How do you know how best to direct your efforts to improve safety in a workplace? So we did some more research. The second project was that we looked at all the measures that are around to try to assess safety culture and safety climate in different workplaces. And there are hundreds around the world. Over the decades, people have developed a whole range of different ways to measure safety climate. They're sometimes called measures of safety culture, but usually they're measuring safety climate. They're looking at what can be seen and assessed in a workplace. We found that there's a whole range of different measures, and they vary with regard to their purpose and their intent. If you're looking for a measure of a safety climate to use in your workplace, you could inspect the available tools and think about what would work best for you. Some of these measures are targeted towards a particular industry, so they're questions asked about specific issues, for example, to do with construction. Other measures have a lot of detail, but that means they'd take quite a long time for people to complete them. Now, when I'm talking about measures, typically I'm talking about a set of questions that can be used in a questionnaire or a survey that the workforce would complete, and the total of their responses gives you an idea of the perceptions they have of the safety climate in the workplace. Now, as I've said, there are lots of measures, and I know it's time-consuming for anyone to try and go through them all and figure out what would be suitable. So we've been trying to identify a kind of generic tool or measure that could be used across a range of different industries and could be used as an early indicator. You might want to complement it with other assessments, for example, more objective measures like the number of hours of training people do, or the number of toolbox meetings where safety is discussed. But we think there are some ways in which you can at least get early indicators of safety climate. So I'll talk a little more about that research. Again, our purpose in doing this research, our whole point, is because we think that safety climate will predict safety outcomes. That is, there's research that shows a more positive safety climate will result in fewer work health and safety incidents. Understanding the perceptions people have about safety, whether they think management are committed to safety, whether they see safety being a priority in the workplace, will influence the way an individual worker behaves, whether they speak up about safety, whether they behave in a safe way, whether they follow the rules, wear their protective equipment, and whether they report incidents, for example. And that in turn will lead to outcomes that are positive for an individual's well-being, as well as being linked to workplace outcomes. There's evidence that safety climate can impact on outcomes related to safety and productivity. And evidence has been shown across a range of different industries. So that's why we do what we do, is trying to figure out how best to measure these shared perceptions people have about safety in their workplace. So one way we've tried to do that is to look at safety climate through leading indicators. Now, while researching safety climate, we've seen that around the world there's increasing discussion about leading indicators of health and safety. Leading indicators are the positive steps that organisations, individuals, managers, workers can take to prevent an OHS incident. In other words, it's about the resources, the positive resources that are available in the workplace and that have an influence on your performance in health and safety. So in a large research project over the last 4 years, my team have been researching and testing a simple practical measure that could be an early indicator of safety climate in your workplace. Now, this is a set of 8 statements that can be used in a questionnaire given to employees or workers. And the 8 items ask people to indicate, for example, is everyone in the workplace committed to health and safety? Now, if you imagine if we asked your workers to rate from 1 to 5 whether everyone in your workplace was committed to health and safety, what do you think your rating would be? We also ask questions like, do workers have the equipment and resources they need to do their job safely? And now, the total score of those 8 items are used as a rating of how the workers perceive the leading indicators in their workplace. Now, leading indicators you might be familiar with, they're often talked about as referring to more objective measures in the workplace, such as the hours of training. But recent research in North America and our own research has shown that we can measure leading indicators in the same way as we think about safety climate, that is in terms of the workers' perceptions of the positive actions about safety in the workplace. So our research, supported by WorkSafe in Victoria, has been with large organisations around Australia to try to test and develop this measure. So we did a national survey. We used a range of measures to look at health and safety in workplaces. So we had our measure, our 8 items, asking about leading indicators. And we also asked, for example, about safety leadership. So our idea, our hypothesis was that the better ratings on leading indicators would lead to fewer health and safety incidents. But we also know that, as Jenny has mentioned, safety leadership is a really important part. If we have equipment and senior management espousing commitment to safety, that's great, but that will be even more enhanced if the direct supervisor of workers are demonstrating safety behaviours. So leaders are important. What your supervisor does enhances the effect of the leading indicators and it has an influence on health and safety. That was the hypothesis, and then we went out and tested it. So we did surveys over the last couple of years in 6 different industries with over 3,500 employees and asked them to answer surveys. We also went back to the workplaces about 3 months later and collected the health and safety records about how many lost time injuries and so on had been reported, experienced in that workplace. Now, our key results from those studies, from the surveys, go into quite a lot of detail. I'm not just giving you a couple of examples of them here. We found strong support for our measure of leading indicators. We found that a higher score on those 8 items about leading indicators was significantly associated with fewer injuries and illnesses. In other words, where the workers saw that there was more attention being paid to leading indicators, more commitment to health and safety, their own experience of health and safety, and 3 months later, the injuries and illnesses recorded in the organisation were fewer. So there was better performance of health and safety. In workplaces where workers gave a really lower score, we saw many more incidents of illness or injury. We also looked at the influence of leaders, and we found that in workplaces where middle managers and supervisors were demonstrating safety, the outcomes are better. And so we did show that the manager's behaviour really enhances the effects of the positive leading indicators. In other words, it really plays an important role in the safety climate of a workplace. And our research is, as I've said, consistent with research that's been done around the world. And there's been a meta-analysis, which is a way of doing a very complex statistical overview of the research findings. Clark's meta-analysis showed that safety climate does improve OHS performance, and safety leadership plays a key role in that, in improving the safety behaviour of employees and reducing work-related injuries and illnesses. So overall, what are the take-home points? Well, our research has produced several important insights. We've learnt a lot, and I think we can offer some really practical advice for people in workplaces. We know that it is possible to measure leading indicators as a way of trying to assess the safety climate in a workplace. We know that leading indicators can be measured across different industries. Our 8-item tool can be used as an initial kind of measure. You might want to use it with other measures as well. I know there are lots of measures out there, and you might want to have more specific measures that suit your workplace. But it is possible to measure leading indicators and therefore safety climate. We know that measuring safety culture is difficult and safety climate is much more accessible. And also, as a researcher who does this for a living, I'd say select the tools or the measures that are reliable and valid and suited to your purpose. Sometimes people say, well, look, that looks good, we'll use that. But really understanding what the tool measures and how it could be suited to your workplace will help you to get a better outcome, to get a better understanding of your own work site. Sometimes it needs to really be considered in the context of what your workers see as important and what really is the key issue in your workplace. We know that safety leadership plays a key role and enhances the safety climate, improves safety behaviour and reduces work-related injuries. So giving attention to your supervisors and middle-level managers, helping them to have the skills and training and knowledge that they need so that they've got the capacity to support your leading indicators, so that your leading indicators are not going to be undermined by the pressure of deadlines or workloads, which often is what we see. We know that safety climate really does lead to improved safety outcomes. And this has been, our research is one example of ways in which organisations can try to get a measure of what you're doing and then, based on that, really start to plan what sort of interventions or strategies or programs or initiatives, whatever you want to call them, could make a difference in your workplace. So I hope that's useful, and I'm very happy to answer any questions or discuss it further. But for now, I think it's back to Jenny.
Helen, thank you very much. I found that presentation very clear, and I think it's exciting. The work that you're doing on the 8-item OHS Leading Indicator tool is very interesting, and I know that our information and resources we'll send out later will give the participants of today's webinar some links to that research and other materials. I also think that, Helen, before we do open up the floor to questions, I imagine that over the course of your research, through interacting with different organisations, you would have probably seen some pretty interesting things that people listening today could learn from. And so I was just hoping that, based on your experiences, if you could talk a little bit about what you've seen out in workplaces as being done really well when it comes to safety, climate and culture.
Sure. Well, it's been really interesting. We spent a lot of time visiting different workplaces, and you see often things that look good in one work site often are based on quite small ideas, but they have a big impact. So one of my favourite examples is we were visiting a mine site, and we were there to survey the workforce. And the day before we'd arrived, an incident had happened. Somebody was injured. A person was taken to hospital and was okay. But when we arrived, the whole work site was kind of buzzing about what had happened. And the other workers had stopped work, and they were reenacting the incident in a safe way, and they were using their smartphones to record it and then to try and figure out what had gone wrong. And this was just the guy's colleagues were trying to figure out what could possibly have happened that led to his injury. And what was fascinating to me was they were trying to figure out what could be done to prevent anything like that happening in the future. There were open discussions about it. There was no kind of blaming and he must have done the wrong thing. There was really a positive encouragement from management. And to me, that was very impressive. I'm not sure that I'd see that in all workplaces, but that was one way in which people were clearly used to trying to solve issues as they arose and put in place preventive measures for the future. And so for me, that's an example of what a good safety culture or safety climate would look like.
Okay, that's really interesting. Can I flip it around now and maybe ask if you could reflect again on things that you've seen, and maybe share with people listening today a mistake or an oversight that you've seen organisations make in this area?
Yes, sadly, all too often we see, well, mistakes or areas where people didn't have the knowledge they really needed to effectively manage health and safety. So it's not always with disastrous outcomes, but particularly where we see managers ignoring the warning signals, failing to listen to advice from people who are trying to speak up about health and safety. That can really erode the commitment and the confidence people have in health and safety in their workplace. So one of the most frustrating things I see is where workers will say, look, the health and safety guy is terrific and the senior managers talk about safety, they get it, but my immediate supervisor keeps pushing the deadlines, we've got this workload, we've got a production schedule. That really means safety has a lower priority. So there's a mismatch between what we should be doing and what is espoused and what really happens. Other mistakes or problems that I see are where they try to hide the problems. So, for example, where we've seen incident report forms locked away in the manager's office so that they just couldn't be reported. That doesn't mean you've got no incidents, it just means that you're not letting people speak up. Really simple thing, but making sure people have access to reporting can help you to learn what's going on so you can improve the safety climate. In another organisation, senior managers ignoring a fire drill because their work was so important they couldn't possibly interrupt it to go down and stand in the evacuation point with everyone else. That sends a really bad message to other people in the workplace. Actions like these can send a strong unintended message and speak volumes to employees about a lack of commitment to safety. So there's some common areas there we know where we see mistakes happening with regard to safety culture and climate.
Well, thank you, Helen, for sharing those insights and observations. And I'd actually like to open it up now for the audience to share any questions or make any comments as a reflection on what we've shared with you today. I'll just give a moment for people to send those through. We've got one question that's come in, and the request has been, could we provide any further advice about how to select an appropriate survey climate tool? And a convenient question for us because we actually have, as part of the resource kit, just a guide to help people determine how to select an appropriate tool for their particular workplace. It leads you through a couple of questions and helps you to sort out what's important in the selection of your tool for the particular circumstances of your organisation and where you're at in your safety culture journey. So thank you for that question. We have others coming in. Helen, this one might be more for you. The question is around top 5 positive performance measures. The request is, have you got any guidance about the top 5 positive performance measures? Because we're starting to drown in OHS reporting, was the person's observation.
Yes, I do know that feeling. We know that there are some broad general areas that are important. One is the management commitment, and by that I mean management commitment that is echoed through the organisation. So how is that demonstrated in your workplace? You might ask your employees in a questionnaire, for example, the annual employee attitude survey. You could include measures about health and safety and ask, how committed do you see management to work health and safety in your workplace? Or you might have more objective measures of that. Do you see safety on the agenda at every meeting? Do you see health and safety being addressed? Are people held accountable for health and safety? But a measure of management commitment is an important positive indicator. Another one is, are people involved in the discussions about health and safety? So employee participation in the decisions that are made about health and safety. We know from reams of research that where people are involved in the decisions, whether it's about safety or anything else, they're much more likely to be committed to the solutions. So employee buy-in or employee involvement is really important. Employee consultation, whatever it's called in your organisation. A third area is around the reporting or auditing of health and safety. An important indicator is whether people see that there are investigations being made and actions being taken. I think one of the things that makes people really cynical in their workplace is where they say, well, I fill in these questionnaires or I do everything safely, but I don't see any action being taken in the organisation. It's pretty natural for people to want to know that there are actions, whether they're audits or reports or accountabilities for health and safety in the workplace. There's my top 3, if you like. There's probably a 4th one I'd say would be whether people have the equipment, the training, the resources available. You can have great policies in place, but if someone doesn't have the basic equipment they need, and that might be the teacher having an appropriate chair in this classroom so he or she can sit in a good ergonomic way, or it might be the person having adequate rest breaks. So those, I've come up with 4, and I'm conscious of time. I could keep going on forever and just drown you in measures, but there, I suppose, are my top 4.
Send it to Helen. Helen, I've just got another great question that's come in. It's a good one. I'm emailing it through to you. Just for the listeners, Helen's actually dialed in remotely. This question has come through and it says, a suitable measure of safety performance is currently being hotly debated with a strong move away from lost time injury frequency rate. How can we conclude that a positive safety climate improves safety performance if we are yet to agree how to measure safety performance?
That is a great question, and I think that it's all part of the discussion. I don't see it as a debate, really. I think we do need to move away from a heavy focus on LTIFR. Everyone knows that there's different ways of measuring it, and you can slice and dice it a number of different ways. What I'd really like to think about is using simple measures to start conversations about health and safety. So I'd really hate it if we just replaced LTIFR scores with some other score. What I'd really like to replace it with is an overall approach to understanding that there's a bunch of things we need to do to pay attention to and prevent injuries and illnesses from happening. And we should be looking at a range of performance indicators. It's not just lost time injuries. Sharon O'Neill at Macquarie University has done some very interesting work with Safe Work Australia looking at these kinds of issues. And so I think we are down the path of thinking about how we can measure these things. It's taken us 30 years to get this far, so it won't be solved overnight. But I think if we can at least think about it as not just focusing on one number like LTIFR, but thinking about it as a range of issues and conversations to start people saying, how safe do you feel in your workplace and what keeps you safe in your workplace? I don't know if that really answers your question. We probably need another couple of hours to really get into that.
We've had a couple of really good questions come in while you were talking, Helen, but I am aware of the time, and I did promise everyone we would get to the end of this session within the hour. So what we will do is we'll answer those questions and follow that up as part of the posting of the webinar resources, and that will all go up within 2 weeks of today's webinar. And I just want to take a moment to wrap up, if I may. Over the course of this webinar today, we've actually achieved a few important goals. We've highlighted the importance of considering safety culture and climate in organisational safety management, and we've clarified the landscape of safety culture and climate and honed in on the consistent research findings. And what we hope to do by sharing that with you is to increase your confidence about the role that safety, climate and culture can play in improving your safety performance in your organisation. We heard from Helen's research that taking action to improve safety, climate and culture is the next logical step. So, to help you take action, we've developed a few resources. And the first of these is an article which is designed to help you consolidate the knowledge you've gained today about safety, climate and culture concepts, and to be able to share it with other people in your company. So that will come through on an email link following this webinar. The second resource that we've developed is a guide to help you select a safety climate survey that fits your needs. There's actually no one-size-that-fits-all solution here. So in this guide, you will get a tool that steps through the criteria to know whether the survey that you're considering is valid, reliable, and appropriate to your setting. Lastly, we've developed a guide which spells out a practical process to follow should you choose to conduct a safety climate survey in your organisation. So having a structured process is very important because it underpins the whole data collection process. If members of a workplace don't feel that their privacy is being maintained, for example, the data that they provide could be misleading. So we've honed out what are the important aspects of administration for climate surveys to make sure that you can really trust the results that you're bringing in. We've combined all of these products into links into one email, which will come out to you with some key insights from Helen's research. Together, these climate resources should be a practical guide for you as you start to think about how you could measure and improve safety at your company. Or if you're already doing this, you might just find some useful tips to make your approach even better. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar. This webinar has been part of our Safety Leadership at Work program, which aims to develop safety leadership capacity, improve safety culture, and reduce work-related injuries, illnesses, and fatalities. The Safety Leadership at Work program recognises that safety leaders do develop over time by learning from others, and it aims to give you access to thought leaders and industry experts and encourage active participation through sharing of experiences. We'd actually love to hear about your safety culture journey or challenges, so please email our inbox at safetyleadership@justice.qld.gov.au. Just before we finish up, I'd like to remind you that we have further webinars coming up in this series. The next webinar focuses on the transportation industry, and our guest speaker will be Dr. Sharon Newman, and an industry speaker will join us. This webinar will be held on the 3rd of May. Don't forget, we have 2 more industry-specific sessions, one on health and community services and the other on construction. And our final session will bring all these threads together and will feature Professor Andrew Neal and 2 industry speakers who will share their safety culture maturity journeys with us. Recordings and resources will be made available following the webinars via the SLAW website. There's just one last thing, of course, before we sign off, and that is that after this webinar, we will ask you to complete a very short feedback survey. What this is for is to help us make sure that we continue to run events that fit your needs. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.